Welcome back to the Diver Guide channel where we talk about how to make your dives better and better. Today we're talking about inward 1.5 pike. We'll take it all the way from beginner to advanced and then talk about at the end going to inward 2.5 pike and inward 3.5 pike. If you like these videos, please subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. I'm trying to grow this channel, and let me know what you think in the comments. With that said, let's take a look at this first diver. It's on 3 meter, and this is a great way to learn inward 1.5 pike if you don't quite have enough power on 1 meter. Doing it on 3 meter can be a really nice way to give yourself some extra space to finish the dive. And this kid is young, so we've talked about this before on other dives, but you can see that he doesn't really bend the board that much. He just doesn't weigh enough to really move the board. Over time, this will get better and better. At this stage in the game, when you're young like this, just fixing your mechanics will make a huge difference, because then, as you get older and stronger, if you have the right mechanics, then all of these things just kind of come into place, and it makes your dives really good all of a sudden, even though you've put in a ton of work to make the mechanics good. And that's exactly what he can do here. So we do talk a lot about the arm circle and squat timing, because that's super important to at least get them going at the same time. You see his arms are basically already down to 6 o'clock before his knees start to bend. And that really takes your body out of alignment when you're going to push. It changes the timing of when you're ready to throw, and that can be a bad habit to get into. So trying to time the squat with the arm circle is a good idea at this stage, and eventually your arms will lag a little bit behind your legs when you're squatting. You can see he comes through, squats not super deep, so that's the deepest point in his squat that he can get to, and his arms get pretty high up. They're at 10 or 11 o'clock. The issue here is that he doesn't straighten out his arms before throwing, so he ends up throwing with bent arms in the beginning, and then they're not straight until they're about 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. The other thing you can kind of tell is that his arms are a little wide. You can see right here that they're split. His head drops, and if your head drops and your arms are bent, you're going to be hunched over and not in a powerful position to throw. This leads to his butt sliding back and just kind of sliding out rather than jumping up. But this is kind of common for somebody who doesn't really move the board that much. They try to throw harder and just get into the dive faster because they don't have as much time in the air. That's the basics on this one. And we have another beginner on 1 meter here. She has a couple issues on the start as well. So on the drop down into the squat, she crow hops and 1 foot slides in front. And that's already going to take you off of a stable base if your body becomes crooked. And that's basically what's happening here. She has 1 foot pushing from further in. That means that the force going through her legs is going to be different. Just like the first person, she also has bent arms on the throw, and you'll see this as we get to higher levels. When the arms get all the way up to 12 o'clock, they might be bent, but before the elbow starts to drop, the hand gets all the way out, and they throw with straight arms. But right here, she's got bent arms. They actually don't get straight at all on the throw, and she's losing a lot of potential for a faster flip. She's not as young, so she has some extra weight to move the board, which is great. She can actually push, but that would involve her getting into a deeper squat, because this is her deepest point right here, and it just looks like she's trying to stand up too soon. So one of the big things with back starts and inward starts is that you want to try and drive the board down as much as possible. Don't think about jumping. Think about pushing the board down as much as you can, and as a result you'll end up jumping higher because the board will be pushing you more. So think about that when you're doing your lead ups, especially on inward dives. You have nothing to lose, so work on driving down as hard as you can. Because her arms are bent the whole time on the throw, she doesn't really get a strong takeoff. She gets into a good pike, it's just a little slow, so she finishes pretty low and it just kind of rolls in short. So the two big things that she can work on is driving down on the board. Fixing that crow hop, that's an easy fix for her. That'll keep her from going crooked, and then extending on the throw will do a lot of good for this takeoff. This next video has a much better head position on the takeoff, and the throw mechanic is also a bit better. But this is where the issue with most people's inwards come into play. I know it was a problem with mine for the longest time. It's all about balance, and balance is the hardest thing to get right on inward, because when you do it right, it feels like you're going to be really close. As he does his circle, his squat is also not that deep, so that's the deepest point in his squat, so he can work on getting down a little bit more too. But in my opinion, balance is more important than the power, so making sure that you have proper balance on the board trumps any amount of squat depth depth that you need. If you should go deeper on the squat, you have to make sure that you can handle it, because if you go deeper, then you're gonna put yourself in a more unstable position potentially, and you're gonna push the butt back on the stand up. So making sure that you have balance first, and then gradually going deeper into the squat will be super important. His arms get all the way through. They actually go back a little bit too far potentially. And then he throws with straight arms for the most part. He could extend up a little bit more, thinking about popping the arms up to 12 o'clock before throwing, but he does a good job keeping them straight, and the head position is in neutral, which is good. You can see he has a much flatter back compared to the first couple people. When they're on their takeoffs, their head is going down and it's rounding their back. This stops the board from being able to push you stronger, and that's why he can jump a little bit higher, even though he doesn't squat that deep. He goes up into a really nice pike too. Look how deep he is in the pike. He opens up and he closes for that entry. He just kind of chests the entry a little bit and doesn't get over the top quite enough to really rip that dive, so it just looks like it's going in a bit short. And now we got a little bit of a different angle on this next one, and we're getting more towards the expert level diving. The main thing I want to point out over the next couple videos is head position on the takeoff. There are some things that are wrong, and I'll point those out quick. You can see when she extends through the legs, her butt is getting pushed back a little bit too much, and that's just gonna mess with the distance on the entry a little bit, and it's gonna make it slower as well. And when we get to the final dive, you'll see what it means to really stand up on top of the board. She does a really great job of extending all the way through the legs and the head position. You can see she's looking all the way out towards the end of the board, and that's how you keep a nice flatter back, and she's extending all the way through the legs. So she's letting the board do a ton of work by pushing all of the force up all the way to her hips. Sometimes you'll see people leave with bent legs, and that's making it so that your body is absorbing all the force that the board is pushing. You need to extend all the way through the knees, all the way through the ankles as much as possible so that the board can push your body into the flip while you're simultaneously throwing with straight arms, which she does, and looking out. That's much better on the takeoff compared to the previous people where you saw them rolling off with round back, head down. And the balance is getting there. You can still see that she's pushing back a little bit, but this is much more improvement. Okay, we can talk about this head position on this takeoff. This is the deepest point in the squat, which is getting much better. We're dropping into the squat a little bit more, pushing down on the board. This is where we see that she's standing up a little bit early. Take a look at this inward 1.5 for a second, and we'll talk about the difference in the stand up here. A lot of people, when they're standing up for the takeoff, you don't see the hips slide in to be in line with the ankles enough. And what I mean by that is if you look at this video and the guy that's closest to us, as he stands up, watch how his hips come forward. As the arms are coming up, the hips are coming underneath the body and they move right in line with the ankles and shoulders. They're all in line right there, and he has a hollow hip position. This allows for a much cleaner takeoff to come straight off the board. As she stood up, the hips didn't move in enough. They came in slightly, but then they got pushed right back out. And that's also happening on this dive that we're going over now. As she comes down, the hips start to come in, but instead of sliding all the way in, they begin to push right back out. So squeezing her core and finishing all the way through the toes on the stand-up will help that a lot. She already has a really good connection. You can see the throw is good. She's looking out at the end of the board and waiting for the arms to get down before she snaps all the way into that pike. So that's great. Now it's all about balance at this stage in the game. Early on, balance is the hardest thing to get on inwards. A lot of people spend a lot of time pushing away, and that's natural because it's scary to be close to the board and you don't want to stand up right over the board. But in order to get to inward 2.5 and inward 3.5, you have to become more comfortable with staying on top of the board. Let's chat quick about underwaters, which we've gone over on other videos, but it's good to touch on. You can see this is their position right before they go in. They are locked out. There's no space between their arms and ears, so it's airtight there. And then as they go underwater, you can see them swimming their arms to the side. I'd like to highlight the difference between the person on the left and the person on the right, because you can see the person on the right, their air bubbles are much wider than the person on the left. The person on the left, their left arm is not pushing the air out to the side as much, and you can see that underwater as well. As they swim, the guy on the left, the right arm is much wider out than the left. And this tells me that his tricep isn't locked out enough and that he's not swimming with enough force to the side to get a really, really solid rip. He already has a really clean entry, but it could really disappear if he gets that faster swim. And the guy on the right has a similar splash on the entry actually, but look at the swim. His arms are out wide and all of that air that he's bringing down with him is getting pushed and dispersed out to the side, and that's what creates a rip entry. You have to disperse all of the air that you're bringing down with you. And lastly, I want to show you what an inward 3.5 pike looks like on the start. This is a little bit blurry, but the big idea here is that if you want to go for harder dives, the mechanics are all the same. The speed that you do them and the force that you use just increases. So he has mastered head position on takeoff. He has mastered throwing with straight arms. He has also mastered the drive down into a very deep squat and pushing the board down probably to its maximum limit. Then all of that can translate into faster flips. But you can't get there without doing it right on the inward dive, the inward 1.5, and then the 2.5. And if you think about it, this is the point where he is leaving the board. Look how much of his body is still over the board. His entire upper body is looking straight at the board, and he's moving to a safe distance, right? His legs are completely locked out straight. His head is out. He's still, at this point where he's leaving the board, he's still looking out towards the fulcrum. And it just becomes about how fast you can go from this standing position to down into the pike, and doing all of that without losing balance. Just remember all of those steps, making sure that you're timing the arm circle and squat well, and then working on the head position on the takeoff, as well as the straight arms on the takeoff, really throwing from a place of extension and not curling into a pike or curling down into your tuck. Then from there, as your mechanics become more consistent, you'll start jumping higher, you'll start gaining more strength by going to the gym and using more leg work, you'll be able to push the board down more because of that, and then it'll all transfer into harder and harder dives. But take your time with all these mechanical things in the beginning. Those are the general issues that you'll see with inwards, especially the balance point and just being patient on the board. It's probably the hardest thing with inwards. If you want to talk with me one-on-one, there's a link in my description to set up a time, and we can talk about diving, college recruiting, anything like that. I'd love to help. I hope that this video helps you on your path to better diving, and I'll catch you in the next one.